I'm Julia McFarlane, co-host of the One Decision podcast. We're coming up on a significant milestone. It's our 1-year anniversary of bringing you in-depth analysis of the critical decisions shaping our world. To celebrate the occasion, co-host and former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, and myself, will answer questions submitted by you, the listeners. Spies are usually pretty tight-lipped, so don't miss the chance to write in. Your question might even make it onto the podcast. For more information, head over to onedecisionpodcast.com. You're listening to One Decision, the podcast that looks at the decisions made that have shaped our world. In 1888, the first Chancellor of Germany, Otto von Bismarck, famously predicted that the Great European War was coming and it would begin in the Balkans. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated, allegedly by Bosnian revolutionaries aided by the Serbian group the Black Hand, it ignited the First World War and more than 20 million deaths across Europe. The Balkans erupted again in 1991 with the breakup of the former Yugoslavia, whose capital was Belgrade, now present-day Serbia. The first European head of state to be prosecuted for war crimes and genocide, the infamous Yugoslav president Slobodan Milosevic, stripped Kosovo of its autonomy and imposed Serbian administration on it, sparking its majority Albanian population to protest. Serbia resisted, enacting a brutal crackdown on the province that many Serbs saw as the birthplace of their own nation. After a brutal war which saw more than 10,000 Kosovars killed and half the country displaced, Kosovo declared independence in 2008, with half the international community recognising the nation. But while the fighting paused, peace has been elusive. Serbia, a close ally of Russia and a place where Vladimir Putin enjoys broad support for his war in Ukraine, says it will never recognise an independent Kosovo. And whenever instability flares on the border, fears that this restive region could ignite once more. Vjosa Osmani is the new president of Kosovo. A teenager during the Kosovo War, when her home was raided by Serbian police, she took office at the age of 39, replacing her predecessor, the former political head of the Kosovo Liberation Army turned politician, who resigned to face a war crimes trial. She rose to power on a platform of anti-corruption, winning a landslide resulting in a record number of women in parliament and in the cabinet. While the economy and unemployment are generally the biggest concerns of Kosovars today, she also inherits leading its long struggle for recognition. We sat down exclusively with President Osmani in New York on the sidelines of the recent UN General Assembly. President Osmani, thank you so much for joining us on One Decision. It's great to see you here in New York. Your country, Kosovo, you have your own government, you have your own armed forces, constitution, judiciary, you have your own Supreme Court. In every aspect, you are a state apart from recognition by the international community. A lot of EU nations say that self-determination can't be the only thing for recognition of an independent state, that you need a peace deal with Serbia. Last year, the Serbs refused a 6-point peace agreement, particularly over an article that said it needed to deal with the past. That is, the atrocities and ethnic cleansing that took place in your country. The current president, Vučić, he was a key minister in the genocidal regime of Slobodan Milosevic. I see he popped up at the UN General Assembly, quoting Martin Luther King. He has vowed never to recognise Kosovo as an independent country. Why are EU officials still pushing you to carry out negotiations with Serbia, given what Vučić has said? Do you think the whole thing is a farce?
Well, thank you for having me. At the beginning, I'd like to point out that, in fact, the vast majority of the countries of the United Nations have recognized Kosovo's independence. And back in 2010, the International Court of Justice has decided that Kosovo's independence is fully in line with international law. So the countries who say that the right to self-determination, which was rightly exercised by the people of Kosovo, is not enough, I think we can add up the decision of the International Court of Justice to make it enough. But obviously, there's absolutely no standard in international law or else where a genocidal regime should be asked whether a country, a people, should be exercising its right to self-determination or not. And this has been, as I said, once and for all clarified since 2008 when we declared independence, but later on also through the International Court of Justice, which, as I said, pointed out that no provision of international law has been violated. You also rightly pointed out that the current president of Serbia used to serve as the Minister of Propaganda during the Milosevic regime, exactly during the wars in Bosnia-Herzegovina and Kosovo. And let me also add that during the wars in Yugoslavia caused by that regime, which led to genocide against the people of Bosnia-Herzegovina, against the people of Kosovo, and horrendous war crimes, crimes against humanity. And rightly so, the proposal that you just mentioned that was refused some time ago because of the points on dealing with the past shows that the current leadership in Serbia is not ready to repent, to accept the crimes that were committed at that time, to not glorify Milosevic any longer, but quite the opposite. They continue to glorify him and the generals that committed these crimes at that time. So why the European Union is pushing for this dialogue? Look, I believe that dialogue is the only way forward for resolving disputes between nations, and we've extended our hand of cooperation despite of the fact that Serbia has never delivered justice and has never put the perpetrators of these horrendous crimes in front of justice.
I think it's a really, really interesting time to be talking to you, given the situation with Ukraine and most recently Putin's announcement that he is ramping up his war efforts in Ukraine with this partial mobilization. An MP from Vucic's party said that Serbia would soon be compelled to begin the denazification of the Balkans. He later apologized for that comment. You have previously said that Putin could use Kosovo to widen the conflict in Ukraine. What, in your opinion, should people know about the relationship between Russia and Serbia, and how worried are you for the security of your own country right now?
Unfortunately, Putin has been, for many years, trying to create proxies in other regions of Europe. And just like he did with Belarus, for example, in the Western Balkans, he managed to completely take control over the politics in Serbia and keep this country as hostage. And there have been historical ties between these two countries that are now resulting into the highest level of political, military, and economic cooperation between Russia and Serbia. For example, whilst the rest of Europe has adopted sanctions against Russia, Serbia remains the only one not to do so. They recently just signed a new deal with Gazprom. They have turned into a safe haven for all Russian businesses, and they don't accept to join the European Union or align with the European Union on any of the actions taken against Russia. Quite the opposite. They are serving Putin's interests in the worst way possible and leaving the entire region then quite fragile to the malign influence of Russia. So, I mean, if you look at just the number of military exercises that Russia and Serbia used to have 10 years ago, and now you can see that it has been multiplied. They also have opened a so-called Russian humanitarian center in Serbia, close to the border with Kosovo, which, according to the U.S. Department of Defense, is a Russian spy center. They're planning to open a Russian defense office. The amount of weapons they buy from Russia and China, and the way how they also behave towards Iran, shows that, in fact, there's nothing pro-European in Serbia, but their true friends are Russia, China, Iran, and countries like Venezuela. And they don't shy away to say that. They actually do that proudly. So these connections actually, they create dangers for the entire region, because Putin's intention ultimately is to also expand the conflict elsewhere in the world. So through their proxy Serbia, they want to create tensions in Kosovo, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Montenegro to begin with, and then move on with the rest. Because a destabilized Western Balkans means a destabilized Europe. So after all, this is not just Putin's war against tiny Kosovo. It's him fighting everything European and American that has been achieved in our region. all of the values that are shared and extended and on which the foundations of our country stand. This is their war against the values-based systems that the EU and NATO are.
I take your point. Serbia and Russia obviously have very long historical ties, but I think some Serbians might want to point out that they did vote to agree the resolution condemning the war in Ukraine earlier this year.
They actually voted the resolution to kick Serbia out of the Human Rights Council, Russia, to kick Russia out of the Human Rights Council. But since when Russia cares about human rights? I mean, everyone knows that words mean nothing to Russia. Sanctions mean something to Russia. For that reason, when it comes to words, Serbia has joined the words, but it has not joined a single action against Russia. But when it comes to taking action against the Russian state, against Putin, against his oligarchs, Serbia has not only not been joining sanctions, but has been turning a safe haven for all of those Russians that are very much involved in the war against Ukraine. So I think rather than listen to what they have to say, we should look at the concrete actions that they have towards Russia. And again, it's very interesting to see not just what happened since the 24th of February, but in this past year or so, and how much weapons Serbia has been receiving from Russia, and even buying a weapons system from China that no one in our region has. No one in Europe, in fact, has ever purchased such a weapons system from China. And the day when Vučić received those weapons, he said, I quote, "With these weapons, we can attack deep within enemy territory, within a perimeter of 9 kilometers. Now, if you check who's in that perimeter, you can find 8 countries, 6 out of which are NATO members. Now, of course, we're facing crisis just like every other country in Europe, but I think it's very important for the EU to deliver when we deliver based on the criteria that they have themselves have set. On the other side, I don't think Serbia should continue with accession negotiations because, after all, what kind of a message is the EU sending if it keeps rewarding Putin's best friends?
Well, you mentioned current crisis. Kosovo has been back in the news recently because there was some unrest this summer after a disagreement between Kosovars and Serbs in the north of your country over license plates, with Serbian residents in Kosovo refusing to switch their license plates with Kosovar ones. I believe the implementation of those rules have been postponed for now. Since the end of the Kosovo war, how tense is the situation with Serbia, and how close are you with tensions spilling over again? I mean, what would happen, for example, if the NATO peacekeeping troops in Kosovo were to leave?
There is a clear necessity for NATO peacekeeping troops to stay in Kosovo because Serbia's and Russia's intentions to destabilize our region. And the NATO presence has been an important pillar of peace and security, not just in Kosovo, but also wider. But at the same time, I can never explain what happened in these past couple of months as just tensions between Kosovo and Serbia. Again, there's a clear attacker, because what happened was Serbia was shooting at our border police. We never shot back. Serbia was burning down registration offices at the Kosovo border. We never answered back. So when there's a clear aggressor and a clear victim, I can't just call it tensions between two parties, because for tensions between two parties, you need to have both parties contributing to these tensions. Whereas, in fact, we've only contributed to de-escalation. So let me explain this issue of license plates a little bit. During Milosevic times, there were certain registration plates that were, of course, used in Kosovo, imposed. And then it's been 23 years since that time that a very small number of Kosovo Serbs have been keeping these very old Milosevic time registration plates. So we recognize Serbia's registration plates if their citizens drive through Kosovo or come to Kosovo, and they recognize ours, the legal ones, not the Milosevic ones. They recognize ours when our citizens go through Serbia or to South Serbia, where many Albanians live. Now, there is this minority, I would say 1/8 of the Serb population in Kosovo that has these Milosevic registration plates. I mean, can you imagine 25 years after the war, let's say, in Poland somewhere, people driving with Hitler times registration plates. Obviously, no one would allow something like that, not just because they're illegal, but to have something that represents the genocidal regime is insane to just tolerate it.
Do you say it's triggering to Kosovan citizens?
It's absolutely triggering because these are the registration plates of the cars who would come to your apartment building or to your house, kill your loved ones, and at the same time burn down your house. So you can imagine what kind of emotions it triggers among the people of Kosovo. But even leaving all of that aside, it's illegal. These are illegal registration plates. For 23 years, we've had other Kosovo registration plates. So for citizens to ride around the country, they need to have legal registration plates. I mean, you can't just drive with anything here in New York, right? So practically, it's also an issue of rule of law. So among those Serbs that have these registration plates, there have been some that wanted to change them. So it's not like they're rejecting it. But then there are illegal structures in the north, practically gangs, criminal gangs who are paid by and supported by Vučić, who have been threatening Serb citizens not to do that. And whenever they find someone who is changing the registration plates, they go burn down their cars or they go burn down their house. That's what happened. So practically they are intimidating them. After all, this is an issue of rule of law, and we're not going to give up on our efforts for rule of law and equality before the law of all of our citizens.
I think it's important going through that it's not just an issue of license plates that people may be not totally familiar with the situation may take it as. Your country is hemmed in by quite restrictive EU visas. We've talked about the expectations the EU has on Kosovo with regards to the peace talks. Do you feel like the EU are constructive allies?
Well, I'd say that they are our indispensable allies, but they're quite slow sometimes to keep their promises. Especially on the case of visas. More than 4 years ago, the European Commission has recommended a visa regime. All we need is a political decision at the level of EU Council. All our hopes are now in the Czech presidency, and we're really working with each and every member state to make sure that they are all in favor. There's a lot of disappointment among the people of Kosovo, and this has made so many lives more difficult. Not that it makes the citizens of Kosovo spend a lot to get a visa to travel for all kinds of reasons, but at the same time, it's about the sense of freedom. The European Union was founded on the very basis of freedoms and liberties, and I believe it's against the very foundations of the European Union to deny us that right. We're a small country with just less than 2 million people, and you can imagine even the citizens of countries far away like Venezuela and so on have a visa liberalization with the European Union, and a small country like Kosovo at the heart of the European Union doesn't have that yet. So we're working hard to make it happen, and I'm quite hopeful, but again, very cautiously optimistic about this.
Got it. We have spoken a lot on this podcast with the Baltic nations who are very, very concerned about the situation with Ukraine. And they are a group of countries who are very used to having a much bigger, more aggressive, destabilizing neighbor. Do you speak to the Baltic nations? Do you speak to Poland? Have you been speaking to them more given the situation in Ukraine?
Absolutely. I would say our biggest supporters right now are precisely these nations. We have similar histories and similar struggles, but at the same time, we've been looking up to these countries for so many of their successes. And I've established excellent contacts and communication with the presidents of all the Baltic nations, and also we're working closely with Poland. We are very much supporting, as you know, they take joint decisions also in Ukraine, and Kosovo has been following most of these actions that the Baltic states are undertaking when it comes to action against Russia. But at the same time, I believe that we need to alleviate our partnership to a strategic level, especially in three main areas. That is defense, cybersecurity as well as digitalization. We have a specific interest to increase the level of cooperation, strategically speaking, with these countries.
And what sort of form would that take? Like a defense pact, like mutual military exercises with the Baltics?
We're still at the very beginning of discussing these. I just think that given that they have similar circumstances that they're facing, an extremely aggressive neighbor that also always thinks of attacking you, kind of the same mindset. It's not just the intention to attack, but historically it's the same mindset. If you look at Serbia and Russia, there's a lot that we can cooperate when it comes to this. And as you know, cybersecurity has turned into one of the biggest threats, I would say, of this century, but especially lately, our region is under constant cybersecurity threats, and we need to work with these countries who have been building quite stronger systems, knowing that they had to deal with Russia. So we still need to sort out details, but I've raised this, and I think it's very important that we look into ways of increasing cooperation.
I want to ask you about President Trump. He proposed land swaps between you and Serbia as a way of working towards normalization between your two countries. Now, a lot of people have pointed out that land swaps would potentially be a terrible idea, given that if one were to redraw the borders of any part of the former Yugoslavia, you would have Croatia, you'd have Bosnia, you'd have North Macedonia, all wanting to do the same because there are similar grievances and different ethnic lines in those countries as well. And if that were to happen between you and Serbia, causing a ricochet effect on the Balkans, that would be unlikely to remain peaceful. If you were to turn to the EU, there are obviously a lot of countries that are hesitant and in many ways would be unlikely to agree to Kosovo joining the EU. There's Catalonia in Spain, Transylvania in Romania, Northern Cyprus. All of these countries are breakaway regions. If Trump were to come back into office in the next election, what impact do you think that would have on your status? And is the EU a likely alternative if the US would likely complicate the talks with Serbia if we are to revisit the idea of land swaps?
I'd say that there were certain parts of the Trump administration that were pushing for that solution. And then there were certain parts of the administration that were not pushing for that solution. So it was a sort of a difficult situation at that time. But no agreement can be signed without Kosovo accepting it. And we will never accept a land swap agreement. Never. No matter who comes to power here in the United States in the future, Kosovo is not going to accept a solution that would partition it because we have already paid an extremely high price for the freedom and independence and the borders that we have today. Secondly, as you pointed out, this would absolutely open Pandora's box because it would not stop just with Kosovo. It would move on with the rest of the Balkan region countries and in wider Europe. It wouldn't even just stop with the Western Balkans for sure. And finally, there's no comparison between Kosovo and Catalonia and Transylvania and so on. And the International Court of Justice has made that clarification. Kosovo was not a breakaway region. Kosovo's independence is a result of Yugoslavia's dissolution. We were a constitutive unit of Yugoslavia with exactly the same rights as the other units in Yugoslavia. One of those rights was the right to determine your own status and self-determination should there be a process of dissolution. Therefore, just like the other units, we exercised that right. And for that reason, it cannot become, and many others, of course, among which the fact that Serbia committed genocide against us, Spain did not commit genocide against Catalonia, and the same with Romania and the other countries that you just mentioned. So for that reason, there's no comparison to be made, and the other reasons are all outlined in the International Court of Justice opinion when it comes to Kosovo's independence. So there is compatibility with international law. All of the legal, political arguments are in our favor. So the point is, there's no issue called Kosovo status anymore. Kosovo status has been resolved once and forever on the 17th of February 2008. Kosovo's independence is there to stay. It's irreversible and it will not change forever. What we can discuss is how to have better relations with Serbia. But as you know, it takes two to tango, so they will need to start coming to their senses and stop destabilizing.
What do you say to people who accuse NATO of being imperialist and expansionist? And what would have happened to your country if NATO hadn't intervened?
Practically, if NATO hadn't intervened, Kosovo and its people would have perished from the face of the earth. The way how the war in Kosovo was progressing was that in just a couple of months, around 13,000 civilians were killed. So there would be no Kosovo Albanians left. NATO intervened to stop an ongoing genocide. And there's nothing imperialistic about that. There's nothing expansionist about that. But it's precisely the right thing to do. In the face of genocide, there is what we call, as lawyers, an erga omnes obligation, which means an obligation of all to protect the oppressed and to protect the victims of genocide. You can't just turn your back and a blind eye when something like that happens. And there's absolutely nothing expansionist about going and saving unoppressed people.
Thank you so much
Thank you
for your time. It was great.
Thank you for having me.